What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be talking about this lens here. It is a Jupiter 8 50 millimeter f2 lens. It is a Soviet Russian era lens. It's supposed to be a exact replica of the Zeiss Sonar 50 f2. Um, it is an M39 mount, which is basically a Leica screw mount, and I know there's a few other rangefinders that use M39, like the Canon 7 and the Fed, I think it's called. There's a few other. I can't name them off the head. I don't know too much about rangefinders, aside from Leicas. Um, it's a very inexpensive lens, and usually if you find it online, you'll find that they're shipping from the Ukraine or Russia, because that's where most of them are, because that's where they were manufactured. And there doesn't seem to be too many of these in the States, from what I can tell, because I've looked for a lot of them for US shipping purposes, because when I order anything on eBay, I want to receive it as fast as possible. And when it came to this lens, it was a bit of a headache because I ordered it from um, the Ukraine, and it actually didn't take that long. It took about maybe 2 weeks. But whenever you're used to receiving things within under a week, 5 days, 4 days, even 3 days, depending on where you buy your stuff from, it's a bit of a hassle having to wait 2 whole weeks to receive something. And at the time I ordered this, it was to use it on a Leica M3 that I had. So I had an adapter for it, which was a M39 to Leica M adapter. And I never got to use it on my Leica because I had an issue with my Leica, so I had to return it where I purchased it from, which is Adorama. So I was basically stuck with a lens, and I was not sure what to do with it. So I definitely was not going to return it to Russia because I paid about 25 bucks shipped for it. So it did not make sense to ship it back. So I was curious on whether I should use it with my 5D Mark III. But using a small lens like this, putting it in front of a 5D Mark III, it just looks ridiculous, and I just don't want to be one of those dudes out there manually focusing on a 5D Mark III with this tiny lens. It would look ridiculous in my opinion, and I just didn't want to do it. Plus, I already have a 50 millimeter on for Canon, so it just didn't make sense. So what I decided to do was to get this adapter, which I have no idea I think the brand is Keep On, and it's an Adorama purchase I made. It is M39 to Fuji FX mount, and I've been using it on my Fuji Xpro1, and it's been a fun lens to use. So what I basically do is I screw it in, and as you can see before I do, this lens is completely tiny. It's almost like a pancake lens. It's very small. But of course, once I attach the attachments, you'll see that it gets a bit bulkier, but bulkier in rangefinder terms, not in DSLR world terms. So I screw it on here, and basically I leave it like this the whole time. I line up my red dot with the red dot on my Xpro1. Right now I have the 35 f2 on it. Let me just remove it. Line it up, and this is basically how it looks. This is basically how I used it when I first got it, but the issue I had was it's such a low technology lens that there's probably not too much coating on the front element, so it happens to suffer from a lot of flares. And on top of those flares, there's chromatic aberrations. So I had to invest in a lens hood, which is a third-party lens hood I purchased on eBay. And I paid about, I don't know, $5 US shipping. So this is a screw mount thread lens hood. So you screw it on, and that's basically the setup. I do have the lens hood roughed up because I personally roughed it up to give it some sort of character, you know. So that's the lens. Closest focus distance is 1 meter, which is equivalent to a little over 3 feet. So when it comes to close focusing, this is not the best lens, and I'll tell you that right now. For portraits, it's good. I could get some pretty decent headshots. And the bokeh that this lens renders is quite interesting. It's hard to explain. It's comparable to the Helios 44-2, I believe the lens is. That the bokeh has a very unique way of rendering itself. It's sort of like wide open. The bokeh does not close. Usually with bokeh it's round and circular. Well, with this it sort of has a swirl effect. It sort of looks like the bokeh is open. It has a very, very unique look, which is why I love using this lens most of the time, because the photos it renders are sort of out of this world. And of course, as you stop it down to f2.8, f4, the bokeh gets more normalized. I guess you could say it becomes more circular, it becomes more average and sort of boring looking. So I don't shoot this lens anywhere except f2. In fact, if there was a way I could just glue it onto f2, I would, because I never find myself in a situation where I need to stop down. The type of shooter that shoots portraits, and even when I do shoot photography, I like shooting wide open because I like having a very thin depth of field. So what else can I tell you about this lens? It's cheap. The adapters are cheap if you want to mount it on a Canon camera or a Fuji Xpro1 or Fuji X camera. The adapters are fairly cheap. It's quite a breeze to use it with the Xpro1. Being that the Xpro1 does have focus peaking, it is not the best focus peaking on the market, but it's good enough. It's sort of instead of a red highlights for what's in focus, it's a white highlights. So I tend to either shoot in black and white, or I would shoot it in color and just have the live view on, so I could see the image I'm getting, and then just manually focus whatever shines bright white I know is in focus, so I take the shot. And I usually put the drive in 3 frames per second because I always like snapping at least 2 frames back to back, just so that I know in case something moved, or marginal error in case I moved, or back and forth, human error. I have 2 shots, so I could choose which one is best. Let's say the first shot was in focus, but the second wasn't, or the second one was in focus and the first one wasn't. I always have that backup plan when it comes to using manual focus lenses. I don't do that. For instance, I would not do that with my 35 f2. I shoot this on single shot because it's autofocus and it's really accurate. Also, this is a 35 equivalent to a 50, so there's not too much marginal error when it comes to this. This is a 50 on a 1.5 crop body, so it's equivalent to 75 millimeters. So that drastic, tiny movement that you make could definitely shift the field of focus. So it's always good to take multiple shots, or if you have a real steady hand, I mean, one shot is good enough. But it depends on what subject you're shooting. When it comes to shooting portraits, I like having multiple, sort of a burst mode. I wouldn't say spray and pray because it's really like three shots back to back. In the film world, of course, that would be spray and pray because you're just wasting film. But this isn't film, this is digital. What else can I say about this lens? It's a fun lens to use. It's fairly affordable. I would recommend it to anybody, not professionals, of course, but hobbyists that want to find a very unique look in their photography. This is definitely the lens to go with. The aperture is controlled here in the front. As you move this in the front, you'll see the aperture change from f16 down to f2. I do notice that this happens to be very easy to move, and it's very close to the focus. So at times I'm in the street and I'm shooting and I'm like, I take the shot and then I look at my camera and I'm like, shit, I'm at f2.8. I'm like, how the fuck did this happen, right? So what happens is, while you move the focus ring, it's very easy to brush against the aperture ring. So this is a problem that you encounter a lot with these Jupiter lenses. I know there's also other Jupiter lenses on the market. There is a Jupiter 3, which is correct me if I'm wrong, it is a 50 f1.4, which I would love to try. I think Lomography even has a great version of it with modern coatings and stuff like that. I believe there's a Jupiter 7. I'm not sure if it's 7. It's a 35 f2 equivalent lens. And these are all Zeiss copies, Zeiss lens copies. And there's also an 85 millimeter one, which I think it's f2. I would love to try that too, because an 85 f2 on this body would be equivalent to about a 135, which would be amazing for portraits. It would give me the compression that I desire when it comes to portraits. I happen to find that this lens doesn't give me the best compression when it comes to taking portraits. It leaves me wanting more, you know. I'm used to shooting on an 85 on my full frame Canon 5D Mark III, and that's usually the look I like to go with. That's my, I guess you could say, signature look when it comes to shooting portraits. So this leaves me wanting a bit more. In fact, I find myself getting similar bokeh using the 35 f2, which I know doesn't make too much sense. One is equivalent to 50, one is equivalent to 75. How am I getting the same bokeh? I have no idea how that works. I shoot it the same, I frame it the same exact way, and I'm telling you the bokeh looks pretty much the same. More unique on the Jupiter A lens, of course. So that pretty much wraps up my review on this lens. I don't see too many reviews on this lens online, and when I do, it's usually very short or sort of just slideshows on pictures people have taken with the lens. It is a great lens. I would recommend it for anybody really looking to get sort of a fun and creative photograph. It's a very cheap lens. Like I said, it's under $30. It will take a while to get to the United States, but it's definitely fun to play with. You could use it on Fuji bodies, you could use it on Canon bodies, you could use it on Leica bodies. I do find that a lot of people that buy this lens use it on Leicas because the Leica lenses are expensive. Even if you go with a Voigtlander lens, it's you're still looking at the 300 and up lens, 300 and up range. So when it comes to a cheaper alternative, after you spend hundreds of dollars on a Leica, you know, people tend to not have enough money to go get a Zeiss Leica lens or a Leica lens or Voigtlander or whatever else might be on the market. So they tend to want a cheaper option. If you want a cheaper option, this is definitely a recommendation I would go with. I personally never used it on Leica, but I've seen people who have, and the results look amazing. Leicas are full frame, so you're getting your actual 50 millimeters. Still dealing with the quirks. It's a given. It's a great lens. It's an interesting lens. It's a fun lens, and I feel like now in the market, there's not too many fun lenses. I know Lomography does produce a few nice lenses that are fun and vintage, and give you sort of a creative look, you know, because sometimes in photography you need to differ from everyone else. Everyone is using these 70 to 200s and these perfect lenses that sort of replicate images the same way. So sometimes it's good to sort of detach yourself from perfection and find yourself being perfect in an imperfect way. I guess that's the best way I could put it. So let me now get into a rant. This is the end of my review. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. And rate, comment, subscribe, share. Take care. Peace, guys.